Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our SAP Digital Access webinar. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to take care of. We will be recording this webinar and it will be distributed at the conclusion of the webinar in the follow-up email. We also want to encourage participation. All questions will be anonymous, so if you have questions, please type them into the chat box at the bottom of the screen in your Zoom control panel. If we don't get to your questions immediately, we will address it at the end during the question and answer portion of the presentation. And lastly, we want to announce a giveaway that we will be doing during this webinar. We will provide our social links for you in the chat box. If you go to at least one of our social platforms and follow us or like us, you will be entered into a drawing and will have a chance to win a gift card. We will announce the winner at the end of the webinar. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenters.
So hello everyone, my name is Jan Hachenberger. I'm a vice president at AnglePoint. As you may notice, I speak with an accent. I'm actually from German descent and I live there as well. I'm visiting my colleagues here in the US. I have quite a few years of experience around software asset management, and I think I was one of the first that developed a software asset management approach for SAP. So most of the methodologies that you would see in the market provided by other consulting companies actually rooted back to what I have developed. And yeah, now I'm handing over to my colleague, Jeremy.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Jeremy Tarwater. I work for Jan here at AnglePoint. We are in charge of the SAP practice here at AnglePoint. So any of the services that are provided, either Jan or I are going to be in charge and developing future services and all the things that we do here at AnglePoint. My background is extensive in SAP audit and licensing. I was a former auditor at SAP, so a lot of my background is in that space. But yeah, we're looking forward to the presentation today, and we'll go ahead and jump into it. So a little bit before we get into the meat of our content around SAP, we want to introduce you to AnglePoint. So if you're not familiar with our organization, after these next couple slides, you'll at least know who AnglePoint is in the market. So we service some of the largest organizations in the world. And we provide them professional services around software asset management, software licensing, compliance, and even tooling. So, doing implementations and onboarding, publisher onboarding for some of the market-leading tools in software asset management. We do offer start-to-finish services. So if you're looking for help in governance or tooling or very specific publisher licensing issues or concerns that you have, we provide services for every facet of software asset management. Our organization is organized into three major practice groups. So we have a governance practice, a tooling practice, and software publisher licensing practices. The software publisher licensing practice is specific to some of the most common publishers that you can see listed there. So, for example, we're SAP. We also have groups just like us specific to Oracle and IBM and Microsoft and EMC and VMware and Salesforce. So if you have any of those needs for any of these other publishers, we're your go-to providers. We also have software asset management managed service offerings, where if your organization needs more hand-holding on a more regular basis, or you need to supplant your own resources on a more regular basis, we can basically take any of these other categories and come back and help you on a quarterly, monthly, annual basis. And we do that for some of the largest organizations in the world. So quick agenda. This is the topic today is digital access. We're going to try to tell a story here. Where did we all, or where did this all start? Where does digital access come into play? Where are we now? How will it impact you? And what can be done to mitigate the risk? And then ultimately, how can we help? And then, as Alex mentioned at the beginning, we are going to reserve some time at the end for questions and answers. So if we don't cover your question throughout the presentation, that's your time to get those answers that you're looking for. So where did it all start? The easiest way for us to kind of tell this story is to put a timeline together. So prior to 2017, and just as a note up here on the right, you can see the SAP stock price over the last 5 years or so. And we'll circle each timeline event with the stock price. And it's not to say that it's cause and effect, direct cause and effect, but we just found it somewhat interesting. So we wanted to highlight that as well. But prior to 2017, general terms and conditions for SAP were not consistent. So some countries throughout the world had general terms and conditions that mentioned indirect access, some did not. So for example, Germany had it in 2008. The US didn't come around to mentioning indirect access until later, 2013-14 time period. So before that was consistent throughout the world, as you can imagine, it was inconsistent. And we had a lot of confusion, and some people were being hit with indirect access audits and some people weren't, or some organizations. Well, in 2017, in March of 2017, Diageo and the AB InBev cases, the indirect access audit finding cases, hit the news. And we know from being consultants that there was huge confusion, tons of uncertainty, lots of people reaching out, trying to figure out, hey, how does this relate to us? Are we going to be hit with a big bill? What do we need to do for indirect access? Well, because of all of that, in mid-2017, SAP started to actually do something about it. So Bill McDermott during Sapphire made a couple statements saying, static read is not going to be charged. They also introduced order to cash and procure to pay. In that statement, well, in October 2017, they released a document that essentially outlined exactly what Bill McDermott had mentioned in the Sapphire comment. So you can see that they're starting to kind of walk down that path. Okay, how are we going to implement indirect access and make it more consistent across the board? In April of 2018, so last year, they came out with digital access, and that kind of tied the bow on this progression from 2017 on. And in digital access, we'll get into more of the details, but essentially it's normalizing what SAP wants to do with indirect access. Another interesting comment here for this whole timeline is it really does follow a typical project management structure. Right, so here we've got forming at the very beginning where they're trying to figure out what are we going to do with indirect access. Storming, so as they start to implement indirect access or audit indirect access, it causes confusion, the storming phase. And then they started normalizing, right, where they're actually documenting, okay, this is how we're going to audit indirect access. This is how we're going to deal with the licensing issues that are presented with indirect access. And now we're in the performing phase. So, I mean, we could put a question mark next to performing to, because we're not sure how this is all going to perform, but we're in that phase at this point. So it's kind of interesting to see that correlation between project management and what's going on here for indirect access. So yeah. I'm going to pass it over to Jan.
Thank you, Jeremy. So where are we now? I think everyone who attends that webinar is familiar with those next two slides where, or that I have taken then from a presentation called SAP ERP Pricing for the Digital Age. And I don't want to spend too much time, but since hopefully you are familiar with the contents of that presentation from SAP that was kind of coming with the price list for April last year. But just to kind of highlight of where the problem is around indirect access licensing and how SAP envisions digital access to be applied for those scenarios where there may be an issue of indirect access. If you take the left-hand side, the legacy model, and everyone who is attending that webinar and is using SAP software most likely has a license agreement that has been signed before April 2018, which makes it a legacy license agreement. Means like you are primarily using licenses for your named users, plus here there package licenses or licenses for engines. One of the licenses that is highlighted here that also was in the slide before is the license for procure to pay, order to cash, which is called sales and service order execution. It's not in the current price list anymore. It has been taken off as soon as digital access has been included. But that was the first attempt from SAP to have, something, on the roadmap to digital access. Sales and service order execution was licensed based on number of sales and service orders executed, and that is very similar to what we have now in digital access. But regardless of that, if you look at this legacy model and you want to license indirect access, you will run into some problems. And that's exactly what has happened to those customers or, well, companies that we have mentioned, like Diageo, which had issues which will be also then shown in an upcoming slide to make that comparison to digital access. So I don't want to get too much into the details here, but trying to find the right number of users to then derive the license demand for those users and then to decide which user license is most applicable. Is it the professional user, the business partner user, platform user? Depending on your license agreements, that may even include users that have been individually defined with SAP. And how many of those user licenses do you need? Or, well, ask the first question, how many users are actually interacting with your system? And we are dealing here with issues of not being able to make the count because your business partners will not provide that information, or because of GDPR requirements, especially in Europe, may not be allowed to share that information with you. I would say SAP was trying to solve many issues around digital indirect access licensing with the approach of digital access. But really the idea is, instead of counting users, for instance, we just count now, what is the outcome of an interaction between a user or a system with SAP, and the metric that we're looking at is documents. So I think again, everyone should be aware of this concept from SAP. But let's have a closer look. And again, this slide is also taken from that presentation. But I will add another table that you see here on the right-hand side. So SAP pointed out in April last year that they will differentiate between 9 documents. Maybe they will add additional documents in the future. Maybe they also will consolidate on some of those documents. But as you can see here, that SAP has now this requirement for users that want to sign up, or customers that want to sign up for this digital access model, that the counting is not done, as I said, on a user level. It will be done on a document level. And for some of the documents, and that's actually where it's a real brain twister, it will be done on a line item level. Also, some of the documents will come at a different value, which means a line item is not the value of 1, like for sales documents. A financial document line item comes with a value of 0.2. And you can see then, as an explanation on the license calculation, that you basically take the number of documents, use the multiplier, and then you add up all those documents to get to hopefully the right number of documents. And we all could assume or expect that SAP provides their customers with measurement capabilities in the system, in SAP itself, to have a rock solid number on the documents, because that determines the license requirement. From the price list, I've just taken a snippet of the price list that I have available for Germany. And doing the conversion then to US dollars is a bit tricky, but just stick with me. We are talking about a licensing approach where SAP is selling you blocks of 1,000 documents, and depending on the volume tier you're actually then will hit, and the smallest one is 1 million documents per year, you pay a certain price. For instance, the first volume tier in Germany for the in total 1 million documents that you will license comes at 50 euro cents. So that translates into something like 60 US dollar cents. But we are not here to talk about pricing because everyone knows that every SAP customer will have an individual discount agreed with SAP, following also some of the discount policies and so on and so forth. But you can see again here, they already have volume tiers here for 100 million documents. That's like the highest volume tier they are talking about. And you could ask yourself, why do I need something like a 100 million documents? Well, let's see. There is a perfectly good reason for that, and we will explain why.
So as you can see, SAP, so this is a snapshot from SAP support portal. And you can see here, these are all of the different notes that have been published by SAP around digital access. And what we're showing here is that there's been a somewhat of an evolution of measurement approaches for indirect access. So how is SAP going to measure all of these documents that Jan just mentioned, right? And so they've been releasing these notes. The most recent one was back in December. And you can see that there are limitations in some of the earlier notes. So, for example, one of the limitations was mentioned in one of the earlier notes that said must be interpreted based on the current installation environment. We see other limitations where it says, you know, this is the approximate number of licenses that are required in the future. You can see the third one from the third one from the top says that, right? So we can see that there are limitations with these notes. The current, most recent note we have analyzed, and essentially we can see that SAP is trying to count, from a technical point of view, they're trying to count the database table entry, right? So they're saying a document is a entry into a database table. So these notes are reaching to those database tables and trying to count them, right? And the most recent note, as you can see, is marked from our check marks and our X's. These notes do a good job finding out which transaction initiated that table entry. It does a good job of figuring out whether it was created or not, which seems somewhat obvious, but you'll see what we mean in a second. What they still don't do a very good job is identifying which user created that database entry, and it still doesn't tell us whether that document has been updated or not. So because of those limitations that we see, right, from our analysis of their most recent note, we still are wondering, is this measurement going to be a self-declaration sort of measurement for digital access? Of course, as we showed you at the beginning, there has been an evolution of notes that have been applied or released from SAP. So it's likely that they're going to continue to release more nodes, and perhaps they're going to improve their ability. But the question is, where are we now? And right now, we don't have a foolproof plan or product or measurement functionality from SAP in order to give us the exact numbers of what we need to measure for a digital access.
Yeah, and just to add to this, I had a conversation with one of the tool vendors in the market that provides customers with measure additional, let's say, or extended measurement capabilities around SAP, which had a very thorough review of the source code, the ABAP source code on those SAP nodes, and said, well, there's several issues. One was already mentioned, this issue of reviewing updated database table entries, and that's actually one of the things that I found quite interesting when I saw that first publication on digital access from SAP, where they said, well, the only thing that needs to be counted is the first creation of that document and the first line item. And just imagine that you create a purchase order and you make up your mind and you add another line item like another article or service. That would not be counted. So only the first creation is what SAP would look out for. And that more or less, again, becomes kind of a brain twister, since if you would have to have a constant analysis of which database table entry has been created at what date or time, that more or less creates a service by SAP itself around big data and data analytics. So again, we are kind of in a situation where it's, I would say, very unsatisfactory that SAP has not yet really provided customers with a rock-solid solution on how to measure. And on the other hand, we are seeing that this licensing concept is being pushed massively by SAP. So they're pushing it to their customers in several setups, like it could be in case of an audit, or it could be just a regular visit by the account executive, where they will bring it to the table. So we definitely see the need that you should be aware of how this will impact your licensing. So just to give you like 3 use cases that we think are very much a good fit of a situation that you may be into. And we thought it's also interesting just to see of how the Diageo case would have looked like with digital access licensing. And again, you may remember the Diageo case and what was the overall problem of that. Just to give you, a very brief history on the Diageo case. But the problem with Diageo was that they had kind of a service concept where their business partners, primarily resellers of their products. I mean, they are selling liquor, and they have large resellers that sell the products from Diageo. And whenever they wanted to place an order or wanted to check on the delivery and or on the invoices, what have you, they were able to call a call center and ask for maybe something like I want to place an order, or I want to really check the delivery status on some of the goods that I have ordered. The call center agent themselves, they were totally licensed for SAP, and they then used Salesforce as as some kind of third-party application to manage all those customer relationship management issues. And yes, all of that information collected in Salesforce was then transferred to SAP using an interface technology from SAP, or also a license that's called SAP PI that was licensed based on gigabytes, and Diageo actually said, well, we already licensed the data transfer, so why do we have to purchase now licenses for the business partners? The reason for that was that they actually changed the approach on how business partners can interact with the company by replacing most of the call center agents with a self-service portal, where the business partners were able to log on and check on their latest purchase order, or to check for the invoices, etc. And that happened over a couple of months, and as soon as that implementation was done, I could say that SAP came in and then challenged Diageo on exactly the licensing and requested them to pay. Those are not the numbers that we know about the Diageo case. Those were much higher. It's just for having a point of reference. Think about that. You have let's say 500 business partners, and again, those prices that you see, they're absolutely they're just indications. Not taking into consideration something like discounts whatsoever. But think about, you would pay for a named user license, something like $3,200 and you have 500 of those users that you want to license. You would get up to a total value of 1.6 million. That's the legacy model. And if you have a situation like that, SAP is most likely then asking you to really pay for the number of users that you know of that interact with your system, with your SAP system indirectly. Again, I already mentioned the problems around getting the right number of business partner users, for instance. So it's definitely troublesome to have a number that is also then agreed by SAP. Now with digital access, that pain goes away, but another pain kicks in. Since when we talk about license scope, the question of the users is actually now out of scope. It's really just a question of what is being created in that process. But what you can see here is that we're not just talking about any kind of data that is being transferred back and forth between Salesforce and SAP, but it's really the different documents, again, coming back to the document definition from SAP, that are being exchanged. So we are talking about a sales document. And if you use Salesforce to create a sales document, which is kind of obvious because it's the name, Salesforce, then this determines one license. And again, we're talking about line items. Next thing is, based on the sales document, someone is placing a purchase. That creates another document with additional line items that have to be counted. Based on the purchase document, you will send an invoice, which creates another document. So I hope you understand of what that actually implies. And it also implies a massive complexity, because some of the documents may be created by someone internally, like the sales document, for instance, but the purchase document may be created by the external customer that you have, or your business partner. The invoice document, again, is maybe something that's created internally, but a service request is coming again from your customers. So all of that needs to be then actually taken into consideration to then come back with the number of documents in question. So again, some of those documents that I just mentioned are created by SAP users of your organization and do not to be counted. As we know from the review of those nodes, not every SAP node helps that the interaction between already licensed SAP users, internal users so to say, and SAP are not counted for. We have seen situations where still the document counter went up, even though it was something that happened from an internal already licensed SAP users. But again, you need to count at least the purchase documents, service documents, and so on and so forth. With that number that you see here, it looks like that digital access is the better deal. But think about, like, if you are selling not like cars, but something smaller, like that you sell in the hundreds of thousands on a daily rate, so to say. Now I don't actually, now I understand why we have the volume tier of 100 million documents that you can purchase from SAP. Because think about how many sales, purchase, invoice, and service documents you are actually managing in your systems, and considering the line items in each of those documents. So there is also a good chance that the number in the digital access model is much higher. But to come back to my first statement on the problems around legacy licensing, with legacy licensing, it was a problem of counting users, but it was something rather easy to determine, like counting people. Now counting all those technical items, database table entries, it makes it very hard. Another example, which is I would say very comparable, and this is also something that has been pushed to the market by SAP as definitely a scenario for indirect access, is the exchange of data using EDI, which we could call an industry standard since, what is it, like 20, 30 years? It's there as long as SAP is in the market, I could say. For SAP, EDI data exchange is considered indirect access. And I just wanted to give you here a typical setup where, for instance, again, a business partner user or a business partner of your organization wants to transfer data like purchase orders, purchase order acknowledgement, shipping notice, receiving advice, what have you, using, for instance, a software called GXS. That's a software publisher from Europe which has specialized in EDI data exchange. Typically, GXS then sits on, I would say, on an SAP interface using sub-PI, where flat files are being exchanged. And again, in the understanding of the legacy license model, SAP would consider then the entry of data by some business partner into their ERP system, and then that ERP system sending the data to your SAP system, again, using something like GXS as being indirect access. And you can see that it's very comparable to the Salesforce scenario. Again, thinking about what data is being transferred and using EDI, you have the same issue around calculating the number of required documents in the first place, and then to derive the value of the licensing scenario in question. So again, it's actually very similar when we talk about data exchange between a third-party application, or let's call it just an external IT environment with your SAP environment, then the scenarios look quite similar to each other. Last but not least, we have seen many customers out there also in discussion with SAP on indirect access, where we had something that, or where SAP calls it machines creating transactions. We should kind of rephrase that and call it now systems creating documents. And one example that we have seen with one of our customers is that, and you may have a situation like that, where you have a production line and you're using a solution like Windchill, again, something like GXS. It's a solution that is available as a SAP add-on, which supports product lifecycle management. So you could use that solution to push something like bill of materials to your production, so that everyone knows which material has to be put on the production line at what point in time. It can read out sensor information, what have you. It can more or less then also provide information to smart systems like robots, etc. In this setup, there definitely have been in the past also specific package licenses available from SAP. Think about something like utility service providers, where SAP offers special package licenses for smart meters. Definitely in these scenarios, there was already something like a document license, but it was basically based on devices, and again, specifically for utility service providers. In other scenarios where we're just talking about that there is some blue-collar worker standing on the production line and doing the things he has to do, SAP was expecting that you definitely would license that worker, or maybe the manager of that particular blue-collar worker could have received an employee license, just really to have the right license to interact with information managed in SAP using an application like Windchill. With the digital access license model, you could say that you have now kind of options, even though that SAP is not, they may have changed their mind on that, but actually they said that you can have either or, meaning you either have the licensing under digital access and the legacy licensing would not be available, but now we see that they may agree to a mix and match approach. Regardless, if you have people that work in your organization that have indirect access to your SAP system, SAP would still expect you to actually license them based on named users. Regardless, there may be, and I just mentioned those smart meters, there may be scenarios where you cannot have that direct connection between a sensor, a robot, what have you. So, and a human being, someone that can actually receive a named user license. And in those scenarios, definitely SAP would expect you also to look into the digital access licensing. Well, it comes, as I already mentioned, using the slides from SAP, comes at a different value, since, for instance, material documents or manufacturing documents, in some, especially manufacturing documents, the line item itself comes at this value of 0.2. Well, regardless, you can see that you still have to do the calculation to come back with a number that you can use for comparison the different license models and choose the most appropriate for you. That's where we are, basically. It's for us, that's a game changer, since SAP calls it outcome-based licensing. So basically, what SAP does for you as a solution with regard to generating business or creating business in the first place, now more or less needs to be paid as this digital access license model depends on everything that relates to you as a business in comparison to volume, etc. So where are we actually? I mean, it's a problem that we see that many customers from SAP face, is that they pretty much know about their current, SAP license requirements. They know their users. In some cases, maybe they don't, but even an educated guess will help to lead a discussion with SAP on how many users you may need for indirect access. But if you actually are facing a discussion with SAP on digital access, we definitely see a need that you get a better understanding of your SAP environment, to know, really just to take that picture that you see here, to know how fast you have to run, to know what kind of jumping pole that you need, the flexibility of that pole, for instance, and and to determine the angle that you actually have to jump off, and all these things to land safely on the other side. And comparing that with really this digital access licensing offering from SAP means you need to understand your SAP environment. You actually need to know, especially all the interfaces, the data that's being exchanged. Then from that, and Jeremy will go into the details on that on the next slide, but to understand whether that actually can be done with your existing license agreement, or you may have then really a future demand for digital access. And with all of that information, you may hopefully, and this is something we can help you with, then really determine the right approach with SAP in the upcoming discussion.
So what can be done to mitigate our risks? We take a pretty simple approach. We'll walk through each of these steps, but with any risk, the first step is to identify the risk. It seems simple, but to take the time to truly understand where your risk sits. And our typical approach is we're going to start with technical users, right? We're going to start with non-dialogue users. We're going to figure out, what applications do those represent. We also look at dialogue users, so actually user types that are typically used for humans. We'll look at those and we'll try to find, suspicious ones, right? So ones where the number of transactions is not reasonable for a typical human, or for any human really. If they've done 100 transactions every hour for the last 65 days, that's probably not a human. Someone who's always logged on, again, that's probably not a human. We also see for suspicious dialogue users, we might see the actual name of the dialogue user is going to be interesting. So in one example, we saw our customer was saying, distributor XYZ, right? That was the dialogue user account. So we obviously knew that wasn't a real human. But that's the first step, right? Identify where are those applications. Now that you know, okay, what applications do we need more information about, then go out and collect all of the information that you need to know, right? So what's the trigger of access, what account is used to access SAP, the direction of the data, right? Is it just inbound, just outbound? Is it both? Is the data pushed? Is the data pulled? What's the timing of that data transfer? What type of data is being sent, if it's a flat file, an IDOC, whatever. So this is the collection phase, right? You want to collect all the data that you can about each of those interfaces. Once you've identified, okay, now we know what interfaces we have, we need to know, does any of the licensing that we currently have fit or cover that usage? So that's the next step, right? So take all the agreements that you have, go through and see if any of the applications that you've licensed with SAP, or any of the engines or packages or named user based licenses that you've already licensed with SAP would cover any of that use. It's important not only to just make sure that you're covering them, but you want to also consider the value of those products. So for example, if you're licensing a really expensive product from SAP to cover a very small business function or something that doesn't derive a whole lot of value for your organization, maybe that's not the best use of that asset that you've licensed from SAP. So that's an important aspect of that step. The next step is, if you now are left with a bunch of applications or interfaces that are not covered by your current agreement, now what do we do, right? We need to go through SAP's current offerings, both from a legacy perspective and digital access perspective, and figure out what could we cover this use with. We put here digital access should be considered, right? Not digital access should be purchased. The reason is because digital access might not be the best approach, right? We want to evaluate all of the options, and digital access is just one of them. So that's that step, right? We want to make sure that we've exhausted all of the potential options. Once we've exhausted all those potential options, then we prepare for licensing through digital access. So that usually entails figuring out how many documents are in your system at this point, using any of the notes that SAP has right now to see, what sort of demand you might have, deriving acceptable price per unit figures, and then negotiate with SAP. Figure out, what is the best way for you to go about licensing these interfaces with SAP.
Yeah. One comment on that, just as a kind of real life example. We have a customer that has been approached by SAP, and more or less like introducing this new license model of digital access, and they had budget kind of left from the fiscal year. So and SAP made a very good offer regarding discounts. So they just for no reason, so to say, just to have it, purchased 1 million documents, like 1,000 times the 1,000 or block of documents for digital access. Well, the thing is, you need to understand that by doing so, you more or less accept that this will be the way forward with SAP. And again, looking at these complexities and maybe not even the quantities, or the quantities that you may not know right now that may hit you with digital access. Like, again, consider how many of those documents you are managing in your SAP systems, and then really go to the line item level for the majority, or the most important ones that actually are relevant to do business with your external partners, with your customers. That again needs to be done before you decide, just because the discount is, I don't know, above 80% or something like that, to purchase digital access. Again, we definitely recommend to do the assessment first before you make a decision to purchase digital access licensing. Yeah, and just again to sum this up, we can help. I think quite obvious, if we do something like a webinar and we are telling the story around this. Yes, all the steps that have been explained by Jeremy, we can help you in more or less getting to that last step of saying, that model is better for me, or the legacy model is better for me because of, so that you can lead a discussion. And I mean, with SAP, and in that discussion or negotiation, you may end up with maybe a higher discount because SAP understands that you have done your homework and you know what your actual demand looks like. But just be aware of this, that there are some steps that should be taken before making a decision towards digital access.
And that step, contract review, the SAP contract review, is huge. A lot of organizations look at contract reviews and believe that it's just simply counting the number of transactions, right? How many do we have? But there's a lot more to it, especially when you're taking into consideration digital access. As we mentioned, one of the steps was to take the terms and conditions that you've already licensed from SAP and apply them to your current indirect access usage. You need to have a good understanding of what terms can you use. And that's where we can kind of walk in and show you these are the terms you need to hold on to.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, again, when we see what SAP is trying to push to the market, we see definitely that one lever that they use is an audit. And when they identify indirect access, it's typically one of the first solution scenarios they will bring to the table. You have not yet measured your system, but they will ask questions around how many customers do you have, how many products do you sell on a daily basis, things like that, to at least determine a rough number of documents that they will put into a settlement document for really then settling on the audit findings. So being prepared, I think, is definitely something that you should consider. Again, if you would choose us as your partner of choice, that would be something that we definitely would like. Well, that more or less concludes that presentation on digital access. We will get to the Q&A session right after that slide. I have seen that there are already a couple of questions coming in, and we will take the remaining 15 minutes. We pretty much hit it on time for Q&A.
Yep, and just before that, I want to mention the upcoming events that we have. The details will be sent out in the follow-up email from Alex. But we do have a few webinars on other publishers. As I mentioned, we don't just cover SAP here at AnglePoint. So for example, we have a couple of Quest audits coming up. in late February, and then also an IBM subcapacity licensing webinar in March. So again, those details will be sent out at the conclusion of our webinar in a follow-up email.
Yes, it's now coming to Q&A. I have one question that I was expecting, like, when will SAP approach me on digital access? Well, that's a very good question, and I could tell you, if I could place a bet, I would definitely do that. With the next conversation you will have with your account executive about upcoming changes in your SAP environment, and maybe even in something like migrating to S/4HANA, they will bring this up. It's kind of part of their overall agenda. It's like a checkbox that they have to really check. As I talked with the customer about this, one of the customers I have is a publisher in Germany, and they just came and started a weird conversation on how many e-papers do you sell on an annual basis. And well, strangely enough, it was roughly 1 million e-papers, and they then put more or less a number on the table of how much that would cost. It wasn't the 50 euro cents that I mentioned, because that's the volume tier we're talking about. It was less than that, but the publisher basically fell from the chair by seeing that all of the profit margin was gone, and even on top of that, he would have paid really extra cost for publishers, really like for selling an e-paper. You could imagine that for a product that costs 99 euro cents or even like 99 US dollar cents, having a margin of 5%, you actually must get a discount from SAP that is way beyond 90% to still have a valid business case. And that brings something else into the discussion. Imagine that really, like, you will be expected to pay also now for interactions between end users, end customers, and SAP, not just business partners, which were in focus over the last years for SAP. But since you're just counting documents, nobody's asking who created that. It could be a business partner, like a channel partner, a supplier, what have you, but it can be someone like me. Think about a scenario like Amazon. Not sure if they're using SAP, but if they would, SAP probably already had to talk about digital access with them.
Yep. And I when I saw that question come through, I thought about back pain, right? People with back pain say, well, if you haven't had back pain, just wait a while, right? So anyways, it is something that you likely will see as SAP rolls it out. It's definitely something they're going to push, and if they haven't yet, just wait a while. So next, we have another question here. Do you expect that SAP will use the technical user types B, C, and S, those are non-dialogue, non-A user types, to identify line items created by third-party applications? So as we mentioned at the beginning, those notes are somewhat vague. They aren't showing us exactly how SAP is going to calculate these line items. And we really don't see how SAP is going to do that outside of a self-declaration process. The way I would answer that question foolproof is that SAP Audit will use anything they can to identify these third-party applications and the line items and the number of documents that are created within the scope of an audit, right? So we didn't really touch on audits and how to deal with audits. We have in other webinars, but it is our recommendation that SAP will use whatever data they can get their hands on, and it's important for our customers to understand what that data is before sharing it with SAP. So if you feel that SAP is going to use technical user types in an audit to identify line items for a third-party application, you as your organization, you need to make sure that you're understanding what those numbers look like, and what those data points are going to identify for an audit before that information is shared with SAP. So I guess the short answer is yes, they likely will use those, but we don't see exact explanations from SAP yet exactly how they're going to identify this question around line items and documents for third-party applications. All right. Yep. And we got one more here. Again, if you didn't hear at the beginning, if you do have questions, just go ahead and enter them into the chat window. Looks like some of you have figured it out, but let's see. Here's this next one. I have an ongoing audit. Will digital access be part of the settlement discussion with SAP in case indirect access is a finding? I think the answer is yes, resounding yes. SAP absolutely will, especially if they find indirect access, digital access will be at the forefront. In the documentation that SAP published in April of last year, they do show that you do have options, and I believe we mentioned that during our webinar, that they're not going to twist your arm into digital access. They will allow you to choose. Essentially, they give you 4 options. The first one is don't do anything, just continue how you're working, do it however you want. The second is just take the indirect access licenses you've licensed to date and convert them into digital access licensing, so documents. The third would be going forward, you can license digital access. So any of your future needs, you can use digital access. And then the last option is to take all of your licenses, everything you've ever purchased from SAP, your entire contract, give it back to SAP. They'll give you credit and license you 100% in digital access. So all licenses will be under this digital access licensing model. So they are giving you those options, and to date we haven't seen any documentation or any indication that SAP is going to remove those. Obviously they're not going to allow customers to do this forever, but at this point those are the typical options. And I definitely think if you're in an audit and they find indirect access, they're going to give you those 4 options. Yeah.
But keeping in mind, not every scenario for indirect access can be licensed with digital access. So especially for things that are not covered by those document types, SAP still would expect you to go for the legacy model, so to say. And I think that's one of the main reasons why they say, well, it's probably something like a mix and match approach. So whatever is the best fit and the customer agrees. Again, I'm not seeing that just like Jeremy, like being super pushed to the market, but they're trying. I mean, it's again, they want you to understand that they have a change in their overall licensing concept away from it's just counting users. We want to participate in more or less the value you create with the business you do, and we are part of that. We go this route together, and therefore we want to participate in everything that you have then as a gain. It's kind of a gain share, share the gain, share the pain, but maybe SAP is not willing to share the pain. That's with you then. Yeah. So I haven't seen any other questions coming through. If you are, if you didn't have time to put the question in, or it's too complex to have a discussion, since you may have a certain use case you would like to, discuss with us, we're absolutely open. Just send us an email and we'll reach out to you and we can have the discussion. It's not like that we do, these things. I mean, we will help you with that. If it turns to a project, we'll be happy. If none, definitely we will provide you with an answer, or at least some guidance with where to go next. That definitely comes from as a free gift from us to you. So hopefully you join the next webinars on the subjects that have been mentioned by Jeremy, and looking forward to have that conversation with you again. There's some. If you have, so that's something that came from. I'm just looking at the chat window.
And I will say that this is Jan's phone number, and he's a doctor. He never sleeps, so you can call him any time of the day or night, anytime. He will answer and answer any questions.
Yeah, definitely.
No, but I think that this wraps up the webinar. Alex, we'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that great presentation, and thank you for all the attendees for joining us today. Like Jeremy and Jan said, if you have any further questions and you'd like to connect with one of our experts, don't hesitate to reach out to them. through our email or our website. You can always schedule a meeting there. We want to congratulate Rohit Doher for winning our gift card, and we will email you with further instructions on that. That is it for us today. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye now.